Welcome to this Donald P. Belisario College of Communications at Penn State digital video tutorial. This video will cover the basic features of the Nikon D7500 digital SLR camera and how to use it for still photography. Shooting video with the camera will be covered in a separate tutorial. The D7500 will hopefully be available through MediaTek starting in the fall of 2018, or if you are taking a World Campus class, can be rented now through the College of Communications. It is a great camera and offers a host of features and options. It can take beautiful still photos as well as video, but it's also a very complicated beast and it's worth understanding its features and settings before diving in. If you're new to using the camera, and especially if you're new to using a DSLR, you want to make sure to set up the camera properly before you start an assignment. Think of pilots going through their pre-flight checklist. If you don't want to crash and burn, at least metaphorically, then use this video and the accompanying D7500 cheat sheet as your pre-flight checklist. Go through each of the items on the checklist to make sure your camera is set up properly before you head out to use the camera. This is not designed as an everything you always wanted to know about the D7500 but were afraid to ask kind of tutorial. It is designed to get you familiar with the camera and the terminology to start you on your way. We will go over this material again in class, and you'll get many opportunities during the semester to put this knowledge to work, as well as to ask questions so that you're comfortable using the camera. The single best way to learn how to use the camera is, well, to go out and use the camera. The D7500 was introduced in 2017. It replaced the D7200, which replaced the D7100. In case you're curious, there was no D7300 or D7400. The 7500 borrows from Nikon's D500 and D5 cameras, and so the naming convention makes sense, aligning the D7500 with its big brother, the D500. If you've used one of the older 7000 series models, you'll find most of the design and features to be similar. This tutorial will, while focusing on the D7500, prepare you for using the older 7000 models. You'll find certain buttons and controls have moved around on the camera, but most of the features have remained pretty much the same. The big advantages of the D7500 are improved image quality, especially in low light, and better and faster autofocusing. It also offers an upgrade to 4K video recording and some other feature improvements, including a tiltable screen, which is a very nice addition to the camera. The camera kit will typically include the camera body, an attached 18 to 140 zoom lens, charger for the camera battery, and a camera manual. If you have sharp eyes, you'll notice this video uses the camera with an 18 to 105 zoom lens, but the current kit is the 18 to 140, which gives you some extra reach, a nice improvement. Let's work our way through this pre-assignment checklist and the basic settings of the camera. The D7500 cheat sheet is on the handout page on my website, along with a number of other tutorials. Go to willieerman.com/teaching, click on Handouts, and then click on the D7500 cheat sheet. My suggestion is that you print out the handout or make notes for yourself and go through that checklist the first few times you sign out the camera to make sure you have all the settings set properly. Also, if you don't have a camera in front of you right now, stop this video. I'll wait. Go get a camera and have it in your hand as you work your way through the rest of this tutorial. Let's get started. First, the battery compartment. It's on the bottom of the camera. Open the compartment door and you'll see a small yellow lever. Slide that back and the battery should pop free. Check the battery level on the top of the camera before heading out on an assignment. Note that for video especially, the camera uses up that battery pretty quickly, so you want to make sure you start with a fully charged battery. Next, the SD card. This is where your photos will be saved. Cards are rated by their size and speed. Larger cards hold more images, and faster cards record those images more quickly and download them more quickly. If you plan to shoot video, look for a Class 10 card. Slower cards might freeze up as you record. In general, faster cards, larger cards are going to be more useful to you if you plan on using the camera a lot. And stick to name brands. Don't go into a local drugstore and buy some brand you've never heard of and expect that card to be dependable. The card can only be inserted in one way. Don't force it. The logo on the card should be facing out and the card inserted upside down. The slot is spring-loaded, so you'll feel it click into place. To remove the card, press down and it should pop free. To turn the camera on, rotate the slider around the shutter release button on the top of the camera to the on position. Let's be clear, the shutter button, that's what you press to take pictures. The first thing you want to do if you've just signed out the camera or are using it for the first time is to reset the camera. You have no idea what the last student was doing with the camera. Don't find out the hard way. There are two buttons with green dots next to them. One on the top right of the camera and one on the back of the camera lower left. Press them simultaneously and hold them until the display on the top of the camera flashes. This resets most of the menu settings on the camera to the default settings and gives you kind of a clean slate to start from. Next, you want to erase and format the SD card. As I said, the SD card is the small storage card inserted into the camera that records and stores the photos and videos. Formatting deletes everything on the card, so don't do this if you've already been using the camera or card. The idea is to start with a clean slate. Formatting the card also cleans up its internal lists and codes, making it less likely that something will go wrong. Always format a card the first time you're using it, and it's a good practice to format it before every assignment. But remember, formatting erases everything on the card, so don't format it if you haven't downloaded and backed up your files. It's also best practice to keep that card dedicated to your camera and not use it for other kinds of devices or to use it to back up, say, documents or other kinds of things. If a card is used in multiple devices, it can actually get confused and have a hard time recognizing files from one device or the other. Be careful with the card. The metal contacts are delicate. Don't force it into the camera. Try not to drop it, step on it, that kind of thing. Formatting the card is a two-step process because Nikon doesn't want you to accidentally delete everything on your card. Turn the camera on and then look for the two buttons with the word Format in red next to them. One is on top of the camera, next to the shutter button, and the other is the trash can button on the back of the camera, sort of top left. Press both buttons at the same time until the display flashes FOR. If they don't flash after a couple of seconds, let go and try again, and that should work. After the display flashes FOR, let go and then immediately press both buttons again at the same time. You should see the counter on the display reset. So good, we've got the camera reset, the card cleaned up. Let's get some basic settings so you're ready to go out and shoot. The camera has a diopter that lets you adjust the viewfinder to fit your vision. If you wear glasses, you may want to adjust the camera to your vision. If the person who had the camera before you wore glasses, they may have adjusted it. If everything looks a little blurry when you look through the camera, even though you've focused on something, try adjusting the camera's diopter, that small dial on the back of the camera, just to the right of the eyepiece. When you look through the camera, there is information displayed at the bottom of the screen. This should be sharp. If it's not sharp, that's another clue that a diopter needs to be adjusted. Next step is to set the ISO. It represents how sensitive the camera is to light. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive the camera becomes, which means you can shoot in darker situations or use faster shutter speeds, that kind of thing. ISO is part of the exposure triangle, one of the three ways along with shutter speed and aperture that we control exposure. Cameras keep getting better and better, but at higher ISOs, image quality can suffer. We start to see digital noise, images are less sharp, and color is less rich. We generally shoot at lower ISO settings if we can, but the D7500 can make beautiful photos at even high ISOs, so don't be afraid to turn that setting up high if you need to. Higher ISOs allow for faster shutter speeds and smaller apertures. In general, we use the lower ISO settings when we're outside during the day and start turning up the ISO as we move indoors or are shooting at night. The camera's ISO range is from 100 to 51,200. Since each doubling of the ISO means a doubling of the camera's sensitivity, ISO 51,200 is 512 times more sensitive to light than ISO 100. At the very high settings, the image will not look nearly as good as at those lower settings, so avoid the very high ISO settings unless it's crucial and the only way to get a usable photo. Typically outside on a bright day, you might be at ISO 100, 200, or 400. As you move indoors into a brightly lit classroom, or if it's a cloudy day, you might be in the 800 to 3200 range. And when you get into darker situations, you'll start hitting those higher numbers of ISO 6400 or even higher. A quick word about the camera's command dials. There are two knobbed or knurled rings on the front and back of the camera near the shutter button. These are the front and the rear command dials. We use them to change settings on the camera. To change the ISO, for example, press and hold the ISO button on the top of the camera under the shutter release. The screen will display the current ISO. The front command dial changes the setting from auto to manual. Let's leave that on manual for now, so we're in control of the ISO. The rear command dial changes the ISO from 100 all the way up to 51,200. Alright, so let's set the white balance. Different kinds of light are made up of a very different mix of color. Daylight is very different from fluorescent lights or indoor light bulbs, for example. Your brain and your eye makes adjustments for that, but we need to tell the camera what kind of conditions we're shooting under. If your camera is improperly set, your subject's going to look like Oompa Loompas from Willy Wonka. Setting the white balance to match the conditions will give you much better image quality. The camera also has an auto setting for white balance. To start, let's use the auto setting. It works well in most situations. As you get more comfortable, or if you don't like the results you're seeing, you can start using the other white balance settings. We would set white balance by holding the WB button on the back of the camera and using the back command dial. Icons tell us what the settings mean. A cloud for cloudy day, for example, the sun for sunlight, a rectangular bar for fluorescent lights, a light bulb shaped icon for incandescent bulbs, etc. You'll also see the auto setting, which we'll be using. The front command dial would let you customize any of those settings, but in general, for now, let's just leave that alone and use the base settings that the camera sets, at least until you become more expert in all of the settings. You'll also see a preset option, which would let you set a custom white by actually photographing something in the scene that was neutral and letting the camera adjust accordingly. Or a K setting, which lets you set a very precise color temperature in degrees Kelvin. Both the K and the preset are very precise, and you can certainly explore those as you become more comfortable with the camera. But for now, as a starting point, auto works pretty well. Let's set the camera up for autofocus. The lens on your camera needs to focus. You can do that manually by turning the front ring on the lens, but the camera is very good at autofocusing, and we will use autofocus most of the time. First, you must turn on autofocus on both the lens and the camera, otherwise the camera won't focus. On the left side of the camera is a switch, turn it to AF. The lens has its own switch, and set that to A. Both the camera and lens need to have autofocus turned on. A quick note, that VR button is for vibration reduction, and it can help you hold the camera more steadily when shooting at slow shutter speeds. Most of the time you can leave that on. There are some circumstances that you can read about where it's a good idea to turn it off, but mostly you can leave the VR switch on as well. There are many different ways to configure the autofocus on the camera, but typically pressing the shutter release button halfway activates the autofocus. Press harder and you take a photo. There are other ways to configure the camera. Many of the buttons on the camera are customizable and you can set them up any way you want, but let's keep this at least relatively simple to start. So, do you want the camera to lock on a subject and then stop autofocusing? Or would you prefer that the camera focus continuously to keep up with a moving subject, for example? Do you want to focus on a single point that you set and can adjust, or have it focus on a section of the viewfinder, or even just pick where to focus all by itself? The camera can be set up to do any of these options. Notice that the autofocus switch on the side of the camera is also a button that can be depressed. If you press in on that and hold it, you'll notice the display on the top of the camera shows you the autofocus menu. So, to set our autofocus, we press and hold the button on the side of the camera, and then we use the back command dial while we're still holding the button, and you'll see that you can change modes. You can go from AFA to AFC to AFS. These are different autofocus modes. AFA is an auto mode where the camera is making all sorts of choices for you, and we're not going to use that one. Let's try and keep this so that we're making decisions and not the camera. AFC means autofocus continuous. The camera is going to keep focusing all the time on whatever it is pointed at, even as the subject moves or as you move. AFS means autofocus single. The camera will lock focus on your subject and then stop focusing until you let up on the shutter and press it halfway again. This means you can focus on something and then recompose the camera, and as long as you keep pressing the shutter button partway down, that subject will stay in focus. Let's explore using the AFC mode. You'll want to experiment a bit and find what works best for you. If you're shooting still lifes or flowers, for example, the AFS mode might work best since the subject of your photo isn't moving. Or you might find you like to work in a slower, more deliberate way and focus and then recompose your shots. So again, AFS, where the camera locks focus, might work best for you. But let's explore AFC, where the camera keeps focusing as you or your subject move. While still holding the AF button on the side of the camera, use the front command knob. This changes what part of the view of the camera uses to focus. You can, in AFC mode, switch between auto, GRP, 3D, and those three are sort of auto modes where the camera's in control, to S, or what you'll see labeled as D51, D21, or D9. Let's look at the settings where we have control. So in the S mode, or the D51, the 21, or 9 modes. In those modes, you set a single point where you want the camera to focus. But the camera looks around that point, depending on what you've set, in case your subject moves off of that point. So for example, a football player moves off of the center point, but you want to keep him or her in focus. If you've used D9 or 21 or 51, the camera is going to look around that single point and try to keep that moving object in focus. D9 would set 9 points around your point of focus, 21 would be a wider grouping, and D51 would be almost the entire screen. So the camera will do its best to keep that player in focus. The difference is how wide an area you pick. If the subject's very erratic and you're not sure where they're going to move inside of the frame, you would pick D51. You'd lock focus on that erratic object, maybe it's a bird flying through the sky or a little kid running around, and the camera would do its best to keep that moving object in focus. If you knew a little bit more clearly where that subject was going to be, an athlete running down a track, you might pick a narrower group, the D9 group. And the advantage of the D9 group is that there's fewer points, and so the camera can focus more quickly because it's only concentrating on a small area. So D9 will be more accurate and faster, but D51 covers the whole view and might be better for a subject that could be ending up anywhere in the frame. So that's the choices you make. You are picking the single point and choosing what to focus on, and then the camera is working to keep that subject in focus. Let's start with just the S. So the camera will focus on a single point and only what's in front of that point. You'll see as you look through the camera, it's actually a small square that lights up red inside the viewfinder. And then you certainly can experiment with these other modes, but get comfortable with the S mode first and then move to try out some of those other modes. In S mode, we can move that point by using the rocker pad on the back of the camera. You don't have to focus on what is right in the middle of the frame. And in fact, it's often more visually interesting to have our subject off-center. What happens if you focus on a person's face but want to place them off-center? If the red square moves off their face, the camera will focus on what's behind them. We have two easy ways to fix that in the AFC mode. We can move the square, we can use the rocker pad on the back of the camera, and we can move that square wherever we want it. Or we can use the autofocus lock button to temporarily stop the camera from focusing and hold the focus. You can get pretty fast at using your thumb to press that button and hold focus as you compose your photo. Focus on a subject and then press and hold that button. In AFC mode, you'd expect the camera to keep focusing, but holding this button temporarily stops the camera from refocusing. Now we're going to talk about exposure. Exposure simply equals how much light enters the camera for a photo. The dial on the top left of the camera allows us to pick different ways of setting the exposure. The green auto setting is the point and shoot setting that gives the camera total control of exposure, and let's not use that one. We want to understand what it is happening as we set exposure. We want to be in control of the pictures that we take. To begin, let's use the M setting. M is for manual. Note the A, the S, and the P modes right next to the M. In A mode, aperture priority, you set an aperture and the camera will pick a shutter speed and try to set a proper exposure. In S mode, shutter priority, you set the shutter speed and the camera will do its best to pick a proper aperture. And in program mode, the camera will set both a shutter speed and an aperture to try and get the proper exposure. So why not simply use those automatic modes? Because the camera isn't perfect. Learn to set an exposure using the manual settings so you can understand how it works. Then you can use those automatic settings when it's appropriate and override them if necessary. So in manual mode, you will set the shutter speed, how long the shutter is open, and the aperture, how wide that opening is, along with ISO. Shutter speeds are usually in fractions of a second and are displayed as either 1/100 for 1/100th or 1/500th or 1,000th. Or you might only see the bottom number of that fraction. You might see it represented as 100 or 500, even though we're talking fractions. So the smaller the fraction, the faster the shutter speed. Faster shutter speeds let in less light, but they do a better job of freezing movement and motion, which gives you sharper photos. Aperture is represented in a series of fractions as well. You might only see the bottom number represented, 2.8, 4, 5.6, but those are actually fractions, 1/2.8, 1/f4. While we usually see just the bottom, remember that as with shutter speeds, smaller fractions mean less light. So an aperture of 1/8, represented as f8, is smaller than 1/4, represented as f4. Smaller apertures let in less light, so bigger f numbers, less light. Just remember that the larger the number, the less light, both for shutter speed and for aperture. I mentioned the exposure triangle earlier, and these are the other two parts of that triangle. While setting your shutter speed and aperture in manual mode, use the front command dial for the aperture and the back knob for shutter speed. As you look through the camera's viewfinder, you'll see a display at the bottom that shows you the exposure you're setting. You'll also see a meter, a set of dotted lines with a 0 in the center. You can see that same meter on the top display of the camera. As you change aperture, or shutter speed, or ISO, that line will move. Proper exposure is usually when you get the line at or close to the 0. So the line itself, the dotted line itself, disappears and lines up just under that 0. Remember that if your shutter speed is too slow, your photos will be blurry. So they may be properly exposed, but you also need to be thinking about settings that will give you sharp photos. A good rule of thumb is to try to keep your shutter speed above 1/100th of a second. You'll need to go even faster if your subject is moving or if you're using a longer telephoto lens. Faster shutter speeds create sharper photos. A 500th of a second will give you a sharper image because not only won't the camera shake in your hand, but any moving subjects in the frame, their motion will be frozen as well. You'll find that you'll need to set a higher ISO or use a larger aperture to allow for faster shutter speeds. Take a few test photos, play around with exposure, and you'll start to see what we mean by having exposures that are too dark or too light. Just a few more things on the checklist and then you can get shooting. We want to set the camera to take photos continuously for as long as the shutter button is depressed. Remember that the shutter button is that button on the top of the camera that actually takes the photo. The dial around the knob to the left of the camera sets what we call the motor drive of the camera, how fast or how many pictures the camera will take. For now, set it to CH for continuous high shooting. If you're on an assignment or in a place where you want to take a single picture at a time, you don't want to be distracting, or you're worried about the noise of the camera, you can change that setting to S for single. And the camera will take just a single photo every time you press the shutter button. The Q and QC modes are even quieter. In the Q mode, the camera's mirror doesn't release until the release of the shutter button, giving you some control over when a camera makes its loudest noise. Useful in a particularly sensitive or quiet environment. We also want to set the image quality. How will that picture be stored on the card and what kind of quality setting? By holding the quality button and turning the back command knob, we have a number of settings available to us. Typically, to begin, we're going to set that to fine, which is the best quality JPEG file setting. If you've been taught about RAW files and want to shoot RAW, that's an option as well. The front command dial controls the image size. Use L for large for the largest possible file size. You can always make images smaller later on in Photoshop or Lightroom, but you can't make images bigger again. So phew, a long list, a big checklist, but make sure you go through everything on it and make sure your camera is set properly, and then you should be able to get started and not have to worry as much about technical problems the camera can present. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video, and we hope it helps. I'm sure you'll have many questions as you start working with the camera, so don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to search Google for answers. Don't be afraid to read the manual. But if you have any questions about using the camera, please check in and we'll do our best to figure those out for you.